acá.
Démela. Pásala acá. Está en el medio, molesta.
Muy bien. Yeah, your last chance to get some chips without crossing right in front of the author.
Chips.
Okay, if you want
I
chips,
can get on camera.
I know if you want chips, you're just going to come up anyway.
I'm just gonna get up and I'll wait
I
on
know.
camera briefly. with,
Yo soy chip.
Yeah, don't let it stop you.
Yo no tengo hambre, no, gracias.
So I think it's up to you to decide when you think you're ready to start, and I'll just wait for you to...
Absolutely, whenever you're ready.
Well, I think I should do it now or never.
It's now or
no
never.
time like now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming. Appreciate
Thank you
it.
for inviting
I appreciate it. It's a Saturday night, and there's a lot happening in the city as usual. I guess I was going to dedicate this. I will dedicate this night to my friend Gamaliel Ramirez, who died victim of Maria, the hurricane, and over the long run because he did fine in the storm, but then he was fixing up his apartment and he fell from the ladder, hurt himself. He had terrible emphysema anyway. A very fine artist from Chicago, self-taught, who developed Cubist styles and surreal styles without ever having gone to a university to learn what even these things were and why. And he captured a lot of the ambience of being Puerto Rican in the city in ways that I don't think any of the other artists, many very good Puerto Rican artists, as well as other Latino artists, captured. And he did the cover for the book we're talking about tonight, as well as my forthcoming book. I have another one that's in galleys now, which is the third and final volume of a series I've done on the border, and really in the 60s and into the early 70s. The second one is probably the first of the books I've done, I think, that has a fairly strong political bite. I was always identified with politics, and it's funny when I write fiction, it doesn't always work out that way. Because you write what drives you, and at a given time, sometimes it's politics, and sometimes so the book Sandino on the Border has some things that deal with a lot of politics because I was in a very political world at the time that I described. In any event, this book I thought was maybe the best to present here because it's a very recent book. I have only presented a little bit of it at a memorial for Gamaliel some time ago, and I really didn't get a chance to read very much from it. And that's when Carlos Compian said, well, you know, you really need to have a reading. And so he recommended Heirloom Books, and I want to thank Chelsea because she offered her place, and here we are. Put together, and it's my first time here, really. I came here by the post closed because you had an emergency. So it was my first time to come in here, and it's a very unusual, homey place with lots of interesting books in different areas. I was very surprised by the poetry collection and some of the radical left things I saw in the store that I hadn't seen in some other stores. It's got a lot of interesting things.
Guilty.
In any event, the short of it all I thought was a good collection to look at anyway, because it does, by its very nature, have elements or even stories or parts of stories from most of the other books, including probably what's my best short story. I think it may be my best short story, called The Sculpture, which I probably won't read tonight because I don't think it would be time. It's a 14-pager, and even to cut it, I didn't feel I wanted to do that. I'll probably present it on its own this December. I have a date at the Lozano Library. In fact, it says Marc Zimmerman and Friends, so some people may want to join in a kind of Christmas read on that occasion. But on this occasion, I thought it was important in a literary sense for me because I've been writing what I have called now memoir fiction, which is I start with things that happened. In fact, what happened to me was that for many years, I went through creative writing school and then went on to become an academic and wrote a lot of academic books and edited a lot of academic books. And every once in a while I would write a short story. So I think over my first 60 years on the planet, or the first, starting when I was 10 or 11, I started writing stories. And maybe once every 10 years I'd write something that I really thought was maybe worthwhile, maybe keeping, if I had to have an active anthology. And an opportunity came for me somebody said, why don't you publish your best stories? And I looked at it, I said, almost one for each decade. So I published 6 stories, and writing the 6th story, I hadn't written the 6th story, and one day I had a bottle of wine in Madrid, and I ended up in the mountains of the Abruzzi remembering something that happened to me several years earlier. And when I wrote the story, I was already in my 60s, and I thought, you still have the juice. You still have it. Maybe you can do it. And I was very eager to retire and have enough money to live on so that I could see if I still had the juice when my juice might be running out as the years went on. Whereas in this book, it's called Having the Gas. In fact, the first piece in this book is called the Out of Gas Triptych, because it's 3 related stories about this feeling of maybe not having enough gas to do. Because you have to have some gas to write. You have to have some energy and some source of it. Some of it might be sexual energy, imaginative. You've got to have something that makes you jump. And I was afraid I didn't have that as an old man. I wasn't going to have that. And so it was important to me to see that at that point I still had it. But I had to finish up my teaching thing. And then one day I sat down. I had a dream. And I rushed to the typewriter, not a typewriter, a computer, and started writing down the dream. And then my granddaughter interrupted me. She said, can you take me to work? I'm really late. And I said, well, I'm right in the middle of my story. Okay. And I'm glad I did it because it broke, because I was trying to figure, I got this guy in a situation, he's almost going to commit suicide. How do I get out of this situation? What do I do to make this story go from it being the dream? Because I woke up when he was just on the verge and was so filled with anxiety that I thought I was going to collapse. I took her to work, I came back, and as I sat down, I saw a picture of my friend, my dear friend, who's the subject of another one of my books, Aaron Curlow, who becomes Martin and Marvin. I looked at him and I said, because the guy in the story busted a sculpture of a very famous person. Now that famous person wanted it back to show in his 75th anniversary. It was really Carlos Fuentes, was the figure who wants it back. But it wasn't a bust of Carlos Fuentes, it was a bust of Octavio Paz. Dreams do think very strange things. Somebody had given Fuentes a bust of Paz as a kind of homage to who? Very strange. In any event, I said, the guy in the story, M, as he called in this book, is terrified. They're going to realize now that he's busted this thing. And then he says, no, wait up a minute. I didn't bust it. My friend busted it. So my friend, who is gone, cannot argue the point because he's dead, right? Mm-hmm. I blamed him for it in the story and proceeded to write the rest of the story around that fact, which I would never have done if I'd just been sitting there if my granddaughter had not pulled me away from the machine and I came back ready somehow to finish the story. So I felt when I wrote that story, I can do other stories. So it's interesting because most of my stories, some people have criticized them saying they're too much based on what's happened to you. You don't transform them enough. I said, well, the whole trick that I'm doing is I start with what happened and then I let the transformations sort of take place because I want to write a good story. So I can't just say what happened because what happened might be good, but it might not be that good. So I let things happen. And if I can get away with saying some of the things that happened, I feel good because part of my goal, which was a very strange goal for a writer, is I wanted to, in the few years I had left, tell everything I could from my whole life experience. So the first way I began was to write down little things. And that I also knew that I should keep a dream book. It shouldn't just be what I remembered, it should be what I dreamed, and also little incidents that happened that might fit in. And in fact, that's what this book became. It's the repository of several of my dreams. And some of the dreams deal with growing up, childhood. Some of the dreams, and I call it dreams and scenes because sometimes scenes, things happen, and incidents happen, which are dreamlike, or spur dreams, or derived from dreams, so they became part of the text also. And then finally, so several through my adult years that I'll be reading little bits of and telling you about. And then the final part of the book is my retirement dreams. And retirement dreams are probably the same for most people. Most of you are not yet at that exalted stage. Some of you are, and you know that one of the first things, if you've had a job a long time, is you feel like, what do I do? You're a lost soul. What do I do next? I knew what I wanted to do. I was very fortunate. I wanted to do what I didn't do for many, many years, and it was like a repressed writer, reading everybody else's writing, talking about it, but not writing myself. And so I knew what I wanted to do, but I also knew I was no longer the professor. A lot of the dreams are like the professor who doesn't get invited to the conference, the professor who goes to the conference but nobody knows who he is, or he's been invited to give a talk. When he gets there, nobody's there because the guy who brought him is just some old timer who nobody pays attention to, because nobody pays attention to the old guys anyway. So a lot of the dreams are like that. So I won't read all of those. I'll probably just read one of those to give you a little bit of the flavor of those kinds of stories. But I wanted the book to have its own story, its own arc. And I think, yes, the unifying thing is it's the story of a life. It's the story of a professor who tends to get overweight, who has more than one wife in the course of his life and has problems with his weight, his wives, his ethnicity. He's Jewish, but he's always interested in other people's ethnicities, maybe more than his own. So he's trying, I have to say, no matter what I write about it, whether it's Italian stories or Chicano stories or Mexican stories or Puerto Rican stories, they're always Jewish stories. There's no escape from that. I would be a fool to think that I could or would. And I'm very nervous about the book that's coming out because it deals with some of my experience with African Americans, especially in my years in San Diego when I was in a theater group with a lot of African American actors and whatnot. And I just got the word from a friend, they read pretty well. An African American friend of mine who said, yeah, they're okay. You know, I passed the first test. I thought, oh boy, I'm in trouble. In any event, I was going to start the reading by reading the prologue, but I'm not going to do that because the prologue, I think, is an interesting prologue. It's in 3 parts. It's called the Out of Gas Triptych, and it starts with M, our hero. Kafkaesque naming was part of it. This is my tribute to Kafka. Throughout the book, there are kind of Kafka references. You can find them if you know Kafka. Not too many, but a few sprinkled there. And he rides in. M rides in with the girl on the back of the motorcycle. Really macho kind of 60s kind of guy, except it's not Marlon Brando in The Wild One. You know, it's not Peter Fonda. He's on a motor bicycle. It's a bicycle, so it's kind of ridiculous. And in the very beginning of the story, he runs out of gas, and he goes into this place that has a sign that looked like it used to be a gas station there. So he goes inside, and there's these guys sitting around the bar, and they give him a hard time and a very difficult time, and make it impossible for him to do anything. And he tries to buy some gas, and they take his money, and they don't give him any gas, and they push him out of the place, and he goes back to his bike, and now the woman is gone. And he says, yeah, of course, when you're out of gas, you lose everything, you know. So he lost everything. And he gets on his bike, and it starts the motor. The motor starts up again. And he knew he was just riding now on the leftover fumes, right, that had accumulated. And that's sort of where I feared I might be, I guess, as a writer, and that's the first part of the story. The second part is the guy and now M is on a plane going to Puerto Rico, actually, and there's a guy sitting in the seat forward who's very busily writing, a very young guy, and he's with his Air Mac, and he's writing one thing after another, and he realizes this guy is writing a novel. And I'm trying to write down the dream I had about this guy coming in on a motorbike, and this guy's writing a novel. How can this be? And he's got so much energy and vitality, and he imagines this guy doing this incredible writing job. And I guess I'll try and read a little portion of that. He imagines him doing this as he's trying to write the story about this guy on the motorbike, and he says, Even as I struggled with my own story, I could not help looking over the young man's shoulder to watch him working away. I got lost in my own text, couldn't seem to keep the rhythm going, which I often needed to rock a story into being. My lead character got distracted and couldn't walk a straight line, let alone lend himself to a straight plot. I kept trying to see if I could read what the young man was typing, but couldn't make out a phrase or letter. But it was obvious the writing had to be good, because he even laughed at his own clever comments sometimes, even as he kept on. And then I knew I deeply resented, and yes, maybe hated this young man, even to the degree that I admired him for his agility, energy, and commitment to his craft. I know he was going to work and work, actually enjoying the work, each event in his life, so much raw material for the refinements of his own mind. Barring unfortunate accidents, like a plane crash, or say a violent act carried out by a resentful fellow traveler or writer. He would do all the reading and the necessary pages of writing to finally reach the point where all his early promise would find its fulfillment. Why couldn't I have been like him, so disciplined, writing no matter what in life might come to complicate my path? Why had writing become such a painful and unrewarding enterprise that I began to avoid it for so many years? Why did I have to abandon my writing, giving in to the pains and travails of my life brought me, unable to put in all those years of practice that might have enabled me to write better, something truly worthwhile, so that wouldn't be spending my early 70s. I wouldn't be spending my early 70s trying to make up for those many years lost, writing with a sense of desperation I could hardly contain, knowing I was starting so damned late, and not knowing if I would ever get any of my pitiful little efforts published by some publisher whose books people might actually read, let alone if I would write anything sufficiently worth anyone's also limited time to read anything. And all this while, I was watching this young writer writing away, imagining his future books, his great early triumph, his mid-career crises, and then the profound immortal work that would round out a wonderful career and life. And all this time I was desperately fearing, as did the character in my story, that I indeed started too late and that I was now indeed out of gas. And it was then, and only then, that it occurred to me that I really didn't know if he was writing anything at all, but that I'd fantasized the whole thing. And that absurdly, all of my jealousy and resentment had indeed egged me on to finish Out of Gas in one sitting, and indeed develop the raw material for still another story that would accompany and perhaps outbest the first one, and certainly anything this callow young man could possibly have written at his young age, when he was just beginning, and this when my career was late and blooming, when I was already old, but surely not so much older than Cervantes when he began his famous book, and I still had hopes to write not Don Quixote, but maybe an exemplary novel or story before I was indeed fully and irrevocably out of gas. And then there's a third part of the story, which is a short part, and it's a good move, Marc, in these times. It's sitting some rows back in the same plane is a very accomplished woman writer. And she's sitting there and she's watching these two guys. And she's got her, she's all set. She knows what to do to write. She has Brahms' Second Symphony on. She's got it plugged into her ear. And as the music begins to rise, so does her writing. It's take on more and more energy and vitality. And we don't ever really know what she's writing, but we can be sure that it's superb because she's obviously a very accomplished writer. And as the plane finally arrives, she gets up from her seat, and she says, she passes the young men who are still fiddling with their laptops and can't seem to get everything together to get off the plane, the older man and the younger man, and she says, "Thank you for your help," she said enigmatically to both, leaving them somewhat confused, following her off the plane and into the concourse, where they lost sight of her and of each other as they made their way to their final destinations. And so ends what is really the prologue. It's not so short, but it's a three-part prologue to all of the other shorter stories that make up the book. I will just give you a bit of part one. Part one is Boyhood, and it features a dream which I had put into an otherwise fairly realistic story called The Little Boy Who Flew Away, which appeared in the that first time when I put together those 6 stories from 60 years, right, of writing, and was one of them. And it's part of the dream sequence in the middle of that story. It's maybe too literary to be fully a dream. Who knows? If I were a critic, I'd say it's too literary. A huge snowball turned, okay, it's winter. The name of the book was Stories of Winter. A huge snowball turned black and rolled toward them, faster, getting bigger, getting faster, bigger, huge. And now his stomach grew and grew a mouth that talked to him. That was good, said the stomach, in a voice that was high-pitched and wheedling, cheerful yet insistent all at once. Yes, I want more. The children watched him and laughed as he sat on a stage, surrounded by heaps of food, stacks and stacks of meats and pies and cakes. Helplessly, he stuffed himself as the laughter grew louder and his stomach demanded, yes, more. More. Give me more. I won't ever stop. No, said M, stuffing his mouth. Eat, I say. You wouldn't want to make me die. If I die, you die. So eat. Fill me up. Make me grow. Trucks roared along the highways, blowing their horns. Airplanes zoomed by in formation. Trains from all points made their way to the stage as he sat. Eat, said his stomach over and over again. More, it said, more, while the children and now the adults, all the people of the world, clapped their hands in rhythm and chanted, look at him go, see him go. By truck, by plane, by train, the food poured in. Begging hands, brown, black, yellow, and white, reached out, but the food went into the stacks and heaps beyond the hungry and angry people. The stacks